I use I'm using I use both for both 2004 or Central 7.
No, but like you have a Kubernetes local instance, right?
I did, yeah, I actually have several labs. If I deploy Kubernetes using Kubernetes, it's fine.
Yeah.
The ingress controller using Nginx somehow doesn't work. I read the website for days, never work. During in production, I think we use API like enough.
Yeah.
So you from right?
Yeah. No tres drive for no tres drive. Have blue and yellow.
That's better.
Yeah, I think it was so maybe before 2014. It's more so. I think now, big portion that wasn't supporting is now gone. So it's pretty. I think. Yeah. So I think the parts that are left, I think, is like pretty united now. Yeah.
So what's your job?
The database architecture solutions. Mostly database.
So Kubernetes can, I know.
I don't use it, so I don't use it a lot. It's mostly for development purposes. I use.
All right, everyone.
Sorry.
Good evening, and thanks for attending today's meetup. So we're going to have two presenters today. First will be my friend Tim, and after that, it will be me. So I'm going to let Tim present first. So he will introduce himself, and then he will get started.
Battery 100%.
All right. So given that I have been facilitating all day, I brought my own speaker microphone because I don't want to yell at people tonight. So I am doubling over this evening as the host for Improving, which is my company that I work for, which we are all very glad that you came to join us this evening and appreciate being able to host this user group. And I am an IT consultant with the firm, and we offer IT services, everything ranging from training to actual drop-in software development teams. So, Improving welcomes you and thanks you for being here. A little bit about me. You've already probably read my bio. I spent nearly 25 years in uniform on active duty and in the reserve. So I know a little bit about high-performing teams. And tonight, my goal is to help you understand how you can build team trust. And so I'm not going to delay this any further. And I'm going to kick it off with a little bit of a story. And on board my first submarine, the USS Archerfish, which is now officially Razor Blades, there was a machinist mate, a mechanic, and his name was Don. And Don was an absolutely stellar mechanic. I mean, this guy could fix just about any mechanical and electrical system you put in front of him. And one of my fondest memories of Don was we were in the Mediterranean on a special missions deployment because we were a sealed delivery vehicle platform as well as an intelligence collection platform. And we had a seawater valve that sprung a leak. And we got into port, we tied up next to the tender. The machinist on the tender couldn't take and build a new seawater fitting as a replacement. So Don went into the auxiliary machine room and custom built a fitting to replace the broken one. That's how good this guy was at his job. In fact, I know how good he was because I was actually the guy who filed 3 Navy Achievement Medal awards in his personnel record. And out of that particular time on board the Archerfish, he was promoted to Chief Petty Officer. And Chief Petty Officers in the U.S. Navy are really the backbone. They are the men and women who get stuff done. So I had this very unrealistic view of what heroic behavior looked like. And of course, in the military, in the U.S., we kind of elevate service members to a level where oftentimes we ought not to, because they're men and women and they do great stuff. But one thing I realized about Don's behavior was Don was a one-man show. And as time progressed, I recognized that, being a one-man show, one-woman show is probably not the most effective way to be a part of the team. And so, I took that experience away. And when I transitioned off of active duty and got into the corporate world after returning to college, and I went, maybe Don's way of doing things isn't the right way of doing things, or maybe it's not the best way of doing things. And so, it put me on this journey and opened my eyes to see that oftentimes, people are doing things behaviorally that are not really supporting the team that they're a part of. And that actually breaks down and erodes team trust. And so, my time on board the Archerfish, really informed me that there's a different set of behaviors that we ought to be looking for in the members of our team. And so subsequently, I decided, I should probably talk about this. And this is why we're here. This is actually the reason why David invited me to speak. And, from my early days in the Navy, I embraced what I affectionately call the 3 Ps: policy, process, and procedure. And one of the things that going into this transition from being in the military to being a student and subsequently being in the business world, I thought, okay, I'm successfully using policy, process, and procedure. I know how to do things in a certain fashion in order to get the results that I want. And what I realized after getting a couple of college degrees and doing a bunch of certification and getting embedded in business teams is like, okay, policy, process, and procedure works so far. However, it doesn't work this way all the time. And out of that, I recognize that teamwork and trust have to be built around a whole concept of agility, the ability to make good calls and to create cross-functional teams. And in the submarine community, we had a number of relatively cross-functional teams, but in the special operations community, every operator is a member of a cross-functional team. And I thought that was incredibly good based on where I headed in my business career. And so I do coaching with improving, and I'm an agile coach and a scrum master, and I can get into the details after the presentation if you have any questions about what that looks like. And what I want you to take away this evening is the fact that there's no really right way or wrong way to work within a team construct as long as you're focusing on building team trust. So some of the points that I'm going to cover with you this evening, and I want you to read the disclaimer first, because my wife and daughters tell me, Dad, you're not funny. So if any of this is humorous, it's completely on accident. The learning experiences that I'm going to present, a lot of them are very personal. And I tell my teenage daughters, and I've said this repeatedly to them, if you're going to make mistakes, please, please, please don't do the stupid things that I did. Because, quite frankly, you don't want to get arrested. And because I also encourage them to go bigger. Okay, anyway. So any learning that you get from my mistakes, just follow it in the back of your pocket and go, hey, maybe this is a good reference for a future date. So now on to the what's in it for me. Okay, the 3 points I'm going to cover this evening are how to recognize the hero complex, and the associated behavior, as well as how to gauge trust on your team. Okay, and this can apply to team leadership, can apply to the team members, can apply to external management, external leadership. It doesn't really matter. This is a very flexible set of things that I'm going to share with you. The second thing is how to encourage team enabling behavior from your hero, once you know the type of behavior that a hero might exhibit. And thirdly, how to cultivate trust, develop just-in-time heroes, and in that process, heroic teams. So Don was not my first experience with heroes, and in watching other teams and other dynamics, what I realized is that, you know, if you have one or two heroes, you're in this position where you might end up causing more harm than good to the team. So you might be wondering, what is the hero complex? No takers? No takers? Okay, that's good. Maybe the person online is wondering what the hero complex is. So I want you to reflect on some of your past interactions with different team members. And I want you to consider who that go-to expert was that, based on their knowledge, skills, and abilities, you'd reach out to. Reflect on how that felt to work with that person. I'm going to ask a series of questions for you to kind of focus and concentrate on. Did that person answer all of your questions like, say, Google or Siri? You know, did that person work tirelessly to meet a looming deadline? Did that person step into the midst of crisis or chaos and bring order to the situation, ultimately saving the day? Did that person share their experience, teach other team members, and coach the team to be better and more capable? You know, with those questions and reflecting on your own personal experience in mind, some of the indicators of the hero complex might be that a team member who is not really committed to being a part of the team, yet they're there and they're able to deliver amazing results while grumbling the entire time about getting the work done. You know, maybe it's a team member who shows up at just the right moment to complete the task at the razor's edge at the 11th hour and gets cheered for saving the day, while having every opportunity in the world to show up previously and get the work done well ahead of schedule. You know, these are just two behaviors that I've seen, you know, professionally, but there are definitely more behavioral warning lights. And I'm going to give you an illustration of the worst case scenario, and this is, you know, exhibiting the hero complex. There might be a team member who actually creates a problem, recognizes the problem quickly, works to tirelessly solve that problem, and then subsequently starts blaming the team for not catching the risk associated with that issue, and is blaming them for failing consistently, and does this repeatedly. Does anybody have an experience like that? Can I get a show of hands? Has somebody actually encountered a hero? Yeah, I find that it's well intentioned in most cases, you know, because people want to feel good. Sometimes if everything is running smoothly, you know, there are those folks who just like to put a wrench in the works to see what everybody does. You know, it is worth noting though that the hero complex can actually show up in subtle and less impactful ways. You know, at times it can be really tough to spot. It might be casual comments said with a smile and a shake of the head, a willingness to jump into the mix with a quick fix. Or it could be the hero who, you know, writes down most of the steps to perform complicated work, but accidentally or forgetfully leaves out one or two critical pieces of information. You know, or the hero might run through training or work examples so quickly in real time that you wish you had a pause button for the team to push, just so that the information flow would slow down, so that everybody could catch what was needed and what was of value. You know, those are just a few examples of how the hero complex can actually be disguised as genuine helpfulness and teamwork. You know, these actions can lead to a sense of learned helplessness, where the team is really dependent on the hero to get the toughest work done. Now, here's my first personal example, and you know, I hate to admit it today, but in looking back, I own this. You know, I put a team in a position where they were very dependent on me, and I kind of put learned helplessness on them. And it came during my first deployment to Afghanistan, and we got a mission change. And we were already in Kuwait, and we were having to figure out where in Afghanistan we were supposed to go, whether it was going to be Bagram or Kabul or Kandahar or, you know, Mazar-i Sharif, somewhere in the country. And so I immediately got to work, and I contacted, you know, some folks in my network to get a hold of the gaining command and to start arranging the travel to get us from Kuwait into Afghanistan and subsequently onto our mission. And in all of that effort, in my task focus, what I realized is that I had 11 other people with me who were really sitting on the sidelines waiting to get into the game, waiting to help, you know, figure out how we were going to get from Kuwait into Afghanistan. And, you know, I failed to notice that while I was task focused in achieving the results, the team was actually information starved, and I didn't understand that. And so in retrospect, I should have asked for the people around me for their assistance and asked each person to work on the problems that they felt most comfortable tackling, while enabling communication between the members of the team and growing and sustaining trust among us. You know, I made that particular team dependent on me to solve the problems around our mission change. I acted without creating, providing concrete, actionable information and details around how we might pivot, while gaining the team's agreement, alignment, and support. And that was a lesson I learned the hard way, you know, about being a hero and damaging trust while trying to exercise effective leadership behavior. And oh, by the way, leadership behavior is actually an emergent quality that anyone on the team can demonstrate at any point in time. You know, in self-organizing and self-managing teams, like the ones that I work with, demonstrating leadership can actually increase the team's agility and the trust if everyone is invested in achieving the outcomes that the team and the organization desire. You know, one of my former IBM colleagues, Mo Shah, he said it like this, and I'm always going to give him the credit. You know, we can agree and commit. We can disagree and commit, as long as we commit and we act. Notice I said we can disagree and commit. So teams that have that degree of trust, teams that are really, you know, allowing emergent leadership to happen and happen effectively, they do have disagreements, yet they do commit to taking action. They don't just sit there waiting for something to happen. They make that decision. You know, and sometimes it is one person who actually steps in and says, we're moving, we're going this way, we're going to do this. So, you know, the other part in all of this is gauging team trust. You know, the signals might be plain to see, you know, and hear around the concept of team trust. Like the team doesn't really want to work with the hero, or, you know, the team has just resigned themselves to accepting the hero's behavior, or worse, you know, the team actually works against the hero and against the organization's desired outcomes. You know, that's kind of the worst case, you know, indicator. And distrust indicators could also be subtle. You know, not enough hero behavior to break down trust all at once, but enough to erode it over the course of time. These are weak signals, and they're much harder to detect. And I find it stems from the general sense that many heroes don't even want the spotlight. They just want to get the job done. And the challenge with that is oftentimes the best learning comes through failure. And this is a real challenge. And I know how I am. I'm very success oriented. It's the reason why I wanted to get us to where we needed to go in that prior example. Other signs in all of this might be, team members start to be absent more than usual. They are really starting to disengage from all of the conversations and the collaborative work that's required to get the job done. They may avoid conversations altogether. And I think the worst one is they start avoiding their colleagues, not just the hero who's creating this environment of distrust. This behavior might not lead to explicit action or feedback from the team. It may require a lot of delicate probing on behalf of management and leadership, and on an individual team member basis. And the team's response to the behavior and the way that the team reacts and approaches the hero leading into, during, and after a response might shed a light on the trust dynamic. Now, that being said, I want to take and pivot to the triangles on the screen. So the triangle on the left is the dreaded drama triangle. And I know the type is pretty small when it comes to the actual roles that are illustrated there. The dreaded drama triangle is actually written about in David Emerald's book, The Power of TED, the Empowerment Dynamic. And the triangle on the right-hand side is the TED triangle. And the goal should be for the team to move and transitions itself, once it has the knowledge and the understanding of what's going on, from the DDT, from the dreaded drama triangle, to the empowerment dynamic. And that will help to rebuild and restore trust that is missing from the team because of this level of dysfunction. Now, I want to note that there are exceptions, and especially dealing with more agile teams. And I say agile like lowercase agile, not agile as a philosophy, but agile teams, it might be easier or even harder to gauge team trust, and it just depends on how well-meaning the team members are, because the agile teams I work with generally seek positive intent. They look to positively enable and impact their colleagues. And so it may not be immediately apparent that this hero behavior is happening in the team. And so if the team health starts to trend negatively, if these indicators start showing up, either blatantly or subtly, it might be an indicator that a hero is working hard to save the day without understanding the potential damage to team trust. Now, on to my next thought and my next slide. So, did it go through? Yes, it did. All right. So, my toughest learning comes from failure, and oftentimes it's because I'm working so hard to make things happen that I cannot hear my own teammates over my own awesomeness. And in that, I am constantly striving for personal excellence and precise execution in my work. And I fully admit I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I have pushed myself and others to the points where I've actually caused them and myself to make bad choices. And I have a lifetime of regrets that I'm not going to get into this evening as a result of that. One of my mentors, Tim, who is actually a retired Navy SEAL, said to me, he said, you've got the heart to be on the teams. Your body just couldn't endure the physical punishment. And, I took that as very high praise when he said that, because not only do I, have vision problems, which automatically disqualified me from even considering a special operations career, I'm not very athletic, and couple that with the fact that early in my Navy career, I had to take a typing test, and I couldn't even type 40 words a minute to become a Navy journalist, which, that's like, I have a bunch of disadvantages working against me, and yet I continue to overcome and overcome and overcome. And I share all of that to say this, I am my own worst enemy when it comes to learning and practicing team enabling behavior. So even now, and as I talk to you, I am practicing, I'm eating my own dog food on a day-to-day basis. I've got to go home tonight and apologize to my oldest daughter because I was ugly to her this morning. That's not the way that Team Dickey ought to operate. I said some stuff, and now I'm going to have to eat some humble pie when I get home. Some of the best coaching advice I had ever received was from my dear friend Byron, who I met while I was actually working for Carnival Cruise Lines on the cruise ships after I left active duty. He gave me some straight talk a few years in between leaving the submarine force and prior to joining the special operations community as a reservist. And Byron pointed out to me my willingness to take shortcuts to achieve the next goal or objective. He said some things that I had not considered in how those shortcuts were actually enabling me to come off looking like a hero. And, it really hit me hard. He was willing to take the risk in our friendship to tell me the unvarnished truth. And as a result, I did some soul searching about my motives. I did a lot of deep thinking about what was going on. He was right, I was wrong, and I adjusted my attitude and my behavior while putting in the hard work to get the results that I wanted, without cutting corners. And, not every teammate that you come in contact with can take that kind of blunt assessment, like Byron's was to me. And, we need to remember that each and every one of us is dealing with challenges in life. We may not show it on the surface, but, there's fear and shame. I've talked to many people about impostor syndrome. I don't know if that's one of the things that you deal with. I deal with it. And believe me, I show up to a new team and I'm like, okay, I hope they're not going to ask me to do something that I'm really not familiar with. And I look like, a jerk because I fail. But, there's a whole bunch of influencing feelings and oftentimes negative emotions that are going on with people who are exhibiting the hero complex. And so that can be a big challenge, So when you're looking to address this, you've got to consider where that person is in their own head, where that person is in their professional life, even in their personal life, and proceed with caution and empathy, and providing feedback in that moment when the hero complex shows up. Now, engaging that responsiveness, it may not be the right time, but you can do some reflection in preparation for how to address this. You can look back at your own experiences with that individual, and I'm saying this from being on the team to being outside of the team. It really doesn't matter who addresses the hero complex, and figure out whether that, this is a pattern and a trend, or this is a one-off event that only happens occasionally, and then determine, how it is that you want to talk through that. Once that sense making is complete, you pick the right time, you pick the right place, and you prepare for that conversation with the hero and do it in private, and it will help preserve trust and it will support the team dynamic. I would also suggest, and I say this as a former corporate manager, to invite a neutral observer outside of the team to join you in that conversation as the company or organization policy advises or permits. Without that sense making, without that orientation to figure all of this stuff out, you might make what matters worse rather than make them better. There may be a point in giving that feedback and talking through this behavior where you go, ooh, oh my goodness, okay, yeah, so I'm going to give them the feedback, but maybe this is not the right time to actually talk through what team enabling behavior looks like. Be sensitive. Don't overwhelm the conversation. If you think that that person is getting, ratcheted up and their emotions are starting to ramp, give the feedback and then back away, and say, hey, we'll talk about what team enabling behavior looks like at some other point. These are very sensitive things to talk about. None of us want to feel exposed. I know I don't, but yet I also want to know where I'm failing so that I can do better and I can, behave differently. So if you're having that separation in the conversation, that separate talk about team enabling behavior will also allow that hero to have the space they need to do their own self-reflection, and then they can process through that, and you don't set yourself up for a potential HR situation. Now that's some heavy stuff. So, I'm going to pause for a moment because, this is real life and this does happen. And as a former manager, I've had to take that on. As a military leader, I've had to do this. So I'm not telling you anything that I don't know from personal and professional experience. This is my word of caution, and I'm about to step into another personal story. If you suspect that team member, that hero, has some sort of underlying unspoken point of cause for their behavior, just shut things down, and engage the human resources team. The situation might call for clinical professionals to be involved in this, who are really specifically trained in this space. I don't think any of us are clinicians, right? We don't have clinicians here.
Not sure.
Okay. So, I say that because, this leads to probably the most sensitive of my personal stories. My journey away from the hero complex to finding a new normal had me go in and confront post-traumatic stress as a result of being in combat. And, for a number of years after my final deployment, my second to Afghanistan, I was really tightly wound. I was stressed and I was strained and I was really immersed in my work. And I was easily frustrated and very short-tempered and quick to get angry when I felt ignored professionally in my real job, but yet respected when I was in uniform. So I had this pulling dynamic. I could show up on my reserve weekend and, hey, it's the chief. Or I'd go back to work and I'd have my colleagues, fellow managers, just brushing me off, disrespecting me in front of senior leadership. And it only got worse when I retired out of the Navy Reserve. My responses to stress triggers got to the point where, after some false starts and misunderstandings and missteps, I found myself in the ranks of the underemployed, and I'm not proud of it. I had to take a hard look at my action, my behaviors, and the results, and try to figure out how I ended up in that situation. And I discovered that I needed help to heal from that post-traumatic stress. I wasn't a hero to anyone. especially my family. I couldn't pull off miracles anymore. And, I had to reach the end of my road in my search for validation after my time in uniform. And I needed to work through my hurt, my healing, and find out what that new normal looked like for me. And I do each and every day. Trust me, when I drive down here from north of Frisco, I am managing everything that I normally don't have to, because I don't do well in traffic. Then again, I don't think anybody does well in commuting traffic. So, and so I've learned how to see the world and my work and the teams I support very differently in terms of my own needs and my own weaknesses. So I don't shy away from asking for assistance. I don't shy away from reaching out and having colleagues that I trust give me help and advice. So now, I'm gonna shift gears here and get back to lighter stuff. You might not be dealing with a hero who's got personal or professional setbacks that they're trying to navigate as extreme as mine. But you could be dealing with somebody who's was bullied as a kid, who due to organizational dysfunction or temperamental challenges, this is the way they are today. Teams, and I've seen this in many different contexts. Teams can learn to work around the hero's behavior. And, is it right? Is it wrong? It's not really for us to judge, but it is for the team to look at and go, is this really what we're hoping to foster, as we're working together? There's also some caution to be exercised in all of this, because unfortunately, the organization may be wittingly or even unwittingly enabling this behavior, and so if the culture is not right and the heroes are celebrated, this is going to be kind of hard to work through. Leaders and managers need to be engaged in all of this, and I'm saying that generally in the sense of leaders and managers by title, whether that be a director or a manager or even a senior executive, because they need to help support both the team as well as the hero work through learning this team enabling behavior. And team enabling behavior might be simply asking the hero to demonstrate and teach the skills that the fellow team members need. I mean, crazy as that sounds, you put a hero in a position, especially if they have an affinity for training and instructing, man, there you go. Great opportunity. Could be that the team supports the hero in a side project that he or she just doesn't have the time or the energy to be able to get done on their own. Having the team rally around the hero to do something like this, present at a user group, or even go big and present at a conference, be present and cheer the hero on as they're, of course, learning how to really be part of the team instead of being the Lone Ranger. The team in all of this does not have to travel this road alone in helping the hero develop this team enabling behavior. Again, leadership and management play active roles in this process. They help create the environment that reduces the opportunity for this hero behavior and this hero complex to manifest and flourish, and amplify the structures around the team to support the success of the team. And wrapping up this thought, I'm going to go refer back to our triangles. And the goal should always be that the team is working together to move away from the roles of victim, persecutor, rescuer / hero, and toward the roles of creator, coach, and challenger. Shifting these conversations from anxiety problem focused to passion-based, outcome-focused team interactions can do amazing things. And hey, the results could be less strife and more harmony amongst the team members. So now on to my final point. And of course, another slide. So with my final thought, I want to highlight the importance of rebuilding and restoring and returning trust as a primary objective for everyone involved. Without trust, personal trust, team trust, the team's not going to be able to achieve the desired outcomes and results that are that any one of those members, any team in general is working towards as far as mission accomplishment for the organization. In Stephen M. R. Covey's The Speed of Trust, he writes about this 5 waves of trust model that's here shown in the graphic on the slide. So consider this. If the hero isn't able to trust themselves, let alone their teammates, how can the hero trust the organization? It's a valid question. So this begins with that conscious effort and setting the working agreements up, the ways of working as a team, to continue this process of developing these new habits that encourage team enabling behavior from those heroes. Trust can be restored through consistent team-centered communication around the work that needs to be done. This is one of the things that in Agile teams is really important. We use boards and we talk to the stickies on the boards. We don't talk about the behavior. We talk about the focus on the work. And I've seen teams develop code phrases, and it helps or reorient the hero as the hero might be diving back into this old damaging behavior, like saying, hey, we're all heroes here. Or, ooh, hey, you know what? I see some heavy lifting going on. Self-managing teams can set these dynamics so that the hero feels accountable for the results and to the team and feels valued at the same time while being held accountable. Novel outcomes of all of this is developing this team enabling, in developing this team enabling behavior might be this environment for growth of just-in-time heroes and subsequently a heroic team where everybody is performing at a high level. And just think about this. I deal with software development teams and I go, maybe a high-performing team, as a result of dealing with this hero behavior, develops this elegant algorithm, and it becomes the company's standard by which other teams pattern their work. And because it's just so easy to use and it's so easy to replicate. Because I know algorithms can be developed elegantly. I've seen it. Although I didn't understand it, I've seen it, because I'm not a developer. Maybe it's a product that is co-developed by all the teams with equal levels of contribution that deeply connects with the customers and drives revenues to new levels for everyone in the company's benefit. And this is the one that actually I lived through and I have personal experience with, which is, maybe because you've got just-in-time heroes, the team is able to troubleshoot an outage that restores service to thousands of customers while preserving the organization's reputation, all because the hero replicated their key skills and abilities in others who became just-in-time heroes themselves. These scenarios are a business dream. And I know you may or may not have experienced this yourself. I can tell you that when I was serving in uniform, I had a situation just like this. One of the members of my last team that I served with, her name was Mel. She was just a dynamite intelligence analyst. She was a real hero. And Mel could pull a thread and find supporting intelligence for her theories like no other analyst I had ever worked with. I mean, she was simply amazing. Her work was excellent. It was rock solid. But she needed some coaching on her hero complex and her teamwork skills. We worked as a team to get her past her challenges and to position her for success. She actually began training a number of the analysts on the team to be just as capable as she was. In fact, in her weak areas, her colleagues became just-in-time heroes. I mean, they were truly a cross-functional team. And it supported our unit operations to the point where I think one year we actually got recognized as the best small unit in the intelligence community in the Navy. I mean, you don't do that with a bunch of heroes running around, doing their own thing. You do it as a team. So, I share that because I know it's possible. And I've been working on cultivating this in the teams that I've worked with in business. So I want to shift back to the illustration of the two triangles, because what they're always focused on is shifting, the dynamic within the team. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background above and beyond the initial introduction of what these triangles are all about, because this has been around for a while, and I only recently got introduced to this. This whole concept was first described by Dr. Stephen Karpman in the late 1960s, and I know I have some gray in my beard, but I wasn't around then, so I had no idea any of this existed. And Dr. Karpman actually coined it the drama triangle, where the roles of victim, which is a primary role, the persecutor, which the victim blames for their suffering, and the rescuer, the person who steps in to try and take away the victim's suffering, their interplay actually describes many or most of the common strategies that we as human beings use to manage fear and anxiety. Could you see how fear and anxiety might play into this whole hero complex thing? I mentioned it earlier, the Impostor Syndrome. So it was renamed the dreaded drama triangle for the power of TED, the empowerment dynamic. And it really describes the toxic roles and relationships that any one of us can find ourselves in. So people shift in and out of these three roles in the DDT, and the three roles have their roots in a problem orientation that focus on what they don't want and they don't like. So each role sees the other as problems to react to. Notice I said problems to react to. So the TED is a positive alternative to the drama triangle. And the TED is a set of relationships and roles that offer a substitute for living life as a victim. TED inspires the realization that choice can lead to positive approaches to life's challenges. Reconnecting with our dreams, our desires, and taking action towards those outcomes. Taking action towards those outcomes, action towards outcomes, requires a shift in mindset, a shift in beliefs for most people. So when shifts happen, you move into the creator, challenger, and coach role with a greater awareness that of the options that become available to you. So I would encourage you to consider these concepts when you're working with a hero on your team. Think about how TED might help change the conversation, create just-in-time heroes, and how the 5 waves of trust might start to influence how to establish and restore trust within your team. So to conclude this thought, I just want to refer to the graphic one more time. The end goal for the hero on the team should be to switch from this attitude of, oh, poor me, to, hey, you know what, we can do this in response to the challenges. So bringing all of this home for a land. And just to recap the 3 things that we covered, we started with how to recognize the hero complex, associated behavior, and engage team trust. We shifted into encouraging team enabling behavior from the hero. And finally, we talked about cultivating trust, developing just-in-time heroes, and heroic teams. So to wrap all of this up, I want to challenge you to do some reflection on the trust dynamic in your teams and what it means to everyone involved. Look at the dynamic between the members, assess the behavior to determine how everyone is working and whether they're working to avoid dreaded drama that might lead or enable and support hero behavior. If there are one or more heroes who erode trust, consider how different behavior could be encouraged while dampening the undesired behavior and how to grow and develop just-in-time heroes and heroic teams. See if you can spot the team members who seem to be surrounded by friction. And if you have a hero who is consistently saving the day under the radar, who grumbles at I'm going to put out all the fires, or fixes the complicated issues without, realizing that there's no team capacity being built in that process, then you should consider having that tough conversation. But in doing that, be empathetic, be understanding, and ask open-ended questions while avoiding the temptation to diagnose the origins of the hero's behavior. Work with the team to create opportunities for that hero or those heroes to show and to teach team members how to be heroes, as well as creating that heroic team. And the goal should be always to rebuild and restore trust while moving from the DT to TED. So I'd like to invite you to connect with me, and I want to thank you for your time and attention this evening. It was a pleasure to present to you. Damien, thank you for the invitation. I really deeply appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right. So thank you for that presentation on teamwork. So I definitely gained from that and definitely have a lot of things to work on myself.
Yeah, me too, all the time.
Thank you. All right, so for this second presentation, do you want 2 minutes break? Yeah, let's have 2 minutes break. Then I'll start. All right, I'll run to the restroom.
No, yeah, actually, like today. Yeah, can you show it? Yes, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Kind of like looking for someone normal like study, right?
Yeah, sure. Oh, no.
So,
we're just using like.
most people-
Well, I think it's probably,
And I'm saying this because I've been married for almost 20 years. It's not a good idea to just go, hey man, you're behaving like a jerk. Oftentimes it's better to start with asking some questions. Hey, are you okay?
We don't need to.
Because, that was,
We got to develop on, we got to work
that
on
maybe
that.
wasn't the best way to handle that situation.
If we need, testing
And,
environment
and do it gently. And the way I do it, especially when I'm frustrated, is like, hey, can I ask you a question out of curiosity? Because what I want, before I ever
No, that's a.
jump in the middle of something, I need to understand where that person is coming
Yeah,
from.
yeah. Why would you need?
Yeah.
That's a good way to.
Yeah, and believe me, with my daughters being teenagers, there's a whole host of things that I don't know about. And that I probably just don't need to know about. Because I'd be like, oh, really? So much information. So like I routinely talk to my daughters about boys. It's like a quarterly conversation. Because I don't want a boyfriend to just show up and be like, who's this? Because I don't want to embarrass them. So I just something like, hey, boys, why don't you talk to me about that? Yeah, and we've developed, and this is where it shifts. Over the course of time, when you're approaching somebody with this genuine curiosity and genuine human concern, you can get to that point where you can cut through some of the niceties and get to be like, hey, man, do you realize that you made so-and-so feel bad? But it takes time. So it's just, we're all human beings. even if it's somebody that you really don't like, you can
Kubernetes
take a step back for a moment and go. And,
Well,
and, and there's a technique I learned through counseling. You can reframe it. You can say, yeah, you can say, hey, you know what? Maybe he had to rush to work and didn't get to sleep last night because his wife was up with the baby the entire night. And so he's cranky, he's frustrated, and he's not ready to work. You know, reframing things oftentimes makes a world of difference because then you go, man, yeah, if I were there in that situation, So.
Have you read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People?
yes.
Okay. This author you keep mentioning?
Yeah, his son.
This is son?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Here, let me.
Yeah, I want to present first, but I'm going to contact you to get more insight into things to do.
So if you go out and look, we've got, we've got 2 books out underneath the benches.
Okay.
And one of those books, and they're free to take. So if you find it, actually, you know what? Let me go get one for you.
Okay, thanks.
Multi-cluster won't make your command, won't make a difference in command.
I'll just give you one example. You could, log on some workloads,
That is not a home lab. Or honestly, if you're talking about like a multi-cluster.
These are 2 foundational books.
Okay.
That's why we have multiple copies, but
Right.
that's it right there.
Oh, yeah, this is the one you keep mentioning?
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly.
Speed of trust.
So they're yours.
I appreciate it.
My pleasure, dude.
Thank you.
I mean,
Okay.
like, first off, it's like you need to, have you split up, like a Kubernetes with a Kubernetes dashboard with like a simple Nginx?
Well, right now, I'm not focusing on the application side of it. I'm just focusing on administration of it.
Well,
I have a question for you. So are you familiar with prices?
You need
model?
to,
or
the
like
administration part
10%,
is
well,
like,
50% of the work is done by.
creating, creating.
Okay, so we can tell.
Hope they up together.
I don't know.
We multi-cluster.
Yeah. It's got a number.
I
want to be respectful of you.
Yeah, of course.
I think it's about your side.
All right, are we ready?
Yes.
Okay. So this will be the second presentation. My name is Dr. Damien, and I basically do training as a profession. All I do is train. Well, sometimes I consult as well, but mostly I do training. So we have computer science.
So it's like official, you can become a doctor of computer science?
Well, I have a PhD in computer science.
Yeah. Everybody just came here from different backgrounds. I didn't know that it can be have official degree in computer science.
Oh yeah, you can have a doctorate in any field. So I have a PhD in computer science, basically. And like I was saying, since then, I've been doing mostly training and consulting. And this is our website where we do training, DevOps, microservices, Docker, Kubernetes, Linux, everything in a cloud-native landscape. So I'm one of the organizers of this meetup, and I've done a couple of presentations in the line of the things I'm going to be talking about today. So if I don't go too detailed in anything, if you go back, most likely you're going to find a video on that. But I wanted this presentation to be beginner friendly, okay? Something that people can easily relate with, and just basically showing you one thing or the other. So before I start, do we have any developer here? Mostly, okay. Anyone working on microservices, like actively? Okay, all right. All right, so basically, this is, the topic is how to deploy a microservice application. So there'll be two major, we'll talk about two major things. One is Kubernetes, the other one is microservices. Okay, so we're going to start with microservices, and then after that, we'll talk about Kubernetes, and then I'll try to show you, a few demos. All right. So who can tell us what is a microservice? When we say microservice, what comes to mind?
REST class.
If you're talking about Python.
Well, essentially, just a couple. The idea is a couple of monolithic application into multiple individual independent service.
Okay, that's very good. So to talk about microservices, I'm going to use this Lego. And I didn't have it ready, so I was trying to cheat when Tim was presenting. But we can all identify with this. So this is a block of, let me just say a block of Legos. And you can take these pieces apart, okay? So in the same manner, a microservice application, before we understand a microservice application, we need to understand a monolith, because microservices comes from a monolith. So right now, what we have on the screen, we can say this is the monolith, in the sense that all these components are fused together. They're all connected together, all right? So let me go to talk about why before I come back to talk more about this. So why do we need to switch to microservices? This is just as a pattern of what is happening in our IT landscape. Okay, it's just the innovation going on in the data center or in the IT landscape generally. Okay, so we know that a lot of organizations are moving from on-premises to the cloud. Now we know that at first that wasn't it wasn't something that everyone was excited about. In the early days of the cloud, people were not sure about this new concept of handling their own data to someone else to manage it. Okay, then we know that all that resistance has to be overcome. Okay, but mostly from AWS trying to talk to people about the advantages of this platform. And of course, as more and more people were moving to the platform, they were also realizing that this seems to be the future. At a point, AWS says the cloud is now the new normal. It's no longer a case of whether I'm moving to the cloud. Now it's a matter of when we're moving to the cloud. So what this entails is that all the applications we had in our data center, in our the architectures before the cloud, as we move to the cloud, we have to redesign these applications. And even if you don't want to do that, if you move to the cloud, sooner than later, you will discover that, all right, you actually have to re-engineer these applications. You have to do something about them. And you know that many major organizations, like Netflix and the rest of them, they underwent this challenge. They moved from on-premises to the cloud, and then they realized, wow, this application is not going to scale in the cloud. Why? Because the architecture of the cloud is just different from the architectures of our on-premises infrastructures. And so then they have to think of ways to make sure that this new old application, application they migrate to the cloud, they are able to run it in the cloud environment. So when you're talking about migration, it's all about trying to re-engineer the monolith applications into the microservices application. At the same time, there are a lot of organizations that started in the cloud era. They were not here before pre-cloud. They were not here, like Uber and the rest of them. So when they came in, they had to design their application to suit the cloud. And this is what we call cloud native. And so the architectures of cloud native applications is generally just microservices. Okay, so now that we understand the background to why people need to change these applications, we can now see what a microservice looks like. Like I said, this Lego can represent a monolith. All the components are fused together. So take, for example, the Uber application. If you were to develop the Uber application and deploy it in the on-premises environment, all the components that make up the Uber application, like the driver component, the passenger component, the billing component, every component that makes the Uber application, this will normally be deployed all as a single application, okay? There could be different modules, right? Don't get me wrong. There could be different modules contributing to this application. But at the end of the day, to deploy this application, you have to compile it to a single binary or a WAR file or a jar file, just depends on which environment you're actually using for this application. So when you take the application to the cloud, the problem, number one problem you're going to have is scaling. How to scale this big application? In the cloud, we're used to virtual machines or containers. We're not used to having these gigantic machines, okay? In the on-premises, you can have that. You can put your application in there. If you need to scale, you can scale vertically. Just keep increasing the capacity of your server. In the cloud, we do horizontal scaling. We keep adding more capacity by creating more resources, right? So if I had 3 virtual machines running and I want to scale to 6, I just add 3 additional virtual machines instead of me trying to scale vertically. So you see that this application, if you were to do that in a cloud, it means that maybe, first of all, you need the largest instance size you can get with AWS or Google Cloud or whichever cloud you're using. And then if you want to scale, you have to replicate that size over and over and over again. So even if it were feasible, it would be too expensive. At the same time, it's not even feasible because of the architecture of this application. So scaling is number one, cost probably, and also redundancy, all right? So with your microservices application, you have so many components that are running at the same time. They are not tied to one server. So if you have several services or several servers down, that necessarily doesn't mean the end of your application. Your application could still be functioning, but maybe not fully, okay? So you have a bunch of advantages when you move this application to the cloud and you split it into microservices. So basically, microservices from this architecture here is that we take all these different components, we take the green Lego, we take the red Lego, we take the yellow, and the blue, we put them apart as separate applications. The problem with that, though, is that even though I've just talked to you about the advantages, there are also some disadvantages. Because now, application that was happy functioning as a single application, now you decompose it into several components. Number one problem you have to solve is how do they talk to each other? Because these are not meant to be isolated. This is a single application. Now you decompose them, you have to handle the problem of communication. Also, initially, when you had your application, when you have a workload to deploy to this application, you just send it to the main user interface and you're good. In the microservices architecture, you have to find a way to schedule your workload across this entire microservices. So you have a bunch of them and your application has to be scheduled to all of them. Another major thing to handle is the security. How do you actually ensure that each of these microservice or API is properly protected? Again, before, communication between the components were just maybe using function calls because this is a single application. Now you split them apart, you have to ensure that the communication between them, the calls between them is all protected. The security is taken into consideration. Also, you can look at logging. You can look at monitoring. All these present a whole bunch of issues. And also, this seems very complicated, right? We're talking about distributed systems, and distributed systems are inherently complex. You're not talking about one application, you're talking about different things. Maybe it's like what Tim was talking about. You want to manage a team, teams within the different personalities and behaviors and all that. So imagine managing these different people compared to managing one person. Monolith is like you're managing one person. Microservices is like you're handling all these different components. And to make matters worse, applications that are really big can scale to hundreds, if not thousands of virtual machines or containers, depending on the platform that you deploy them on. So all these problems can be overwhelming. And to be honest, the pioneers who started this microservices journey, they have a lot to report. You can read their woes on the internet. But as things were evolving, technology was also evolving. And so came things like Docker, and Kubernetes. But this has to do with deployment, all right? So when it comes to deploying your microservices, the question to ask is, how do you deploy them? You have the option in the on-premises environment, we deploy our applications on physical servers. Then later on, we came with hypervisors where we can create virtual machines. And then the best you can do in on-premises without containers is to put your applications on the virtual machines, okay? But when we go to the cloud, as I mentioned earlier, these applications are much smaller. You don't want to distribute or deploy a microservice onto a physical server. That would be like overkill. Or even a virtual machine might still be overkill, though they were, early pioneers were doing that before Docker and Kubernetes came. But understand here that these microservices can be very, very tiny because we say micro, can be as small as possible. So when Docker came, it became like a natural fit. It's like a marriage made in heaven. People say, all right, wow, we've been trying to solve this problem, and then Docker came. Now we can package our applications that are so tiny in these containers that is designed to be so lightweight and fast and all the good things we talk about with containers. And so again, along that line came Kubernetes. And Kubernetes aimed to solve all the problems I mentioned earlier. Things like security, things like scheduling, things like decomposing your problem, things like communication. And all this just came together at the point where this technology was really, really needed. And so not surprising, you can see that when Kubernetes came, it kind of caught the IT community. I would say everybody was excited about it. Everywhere you go, you hear about Docker, you hear about Kubernetes. Because, well, the cloud is a new normal. Everybody's moving there. Whether they've moved or they'll still have to move. Another fact is they have to redesign these applications that were monolith. They have to redesign them to microservices. And here's a platform that fit this new paradigm very, very well. Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the biggest thing about Kubernetes and Docker mainstream is, and microservice in general, is they all follow the same theme of decoupling. It's about decoupling and isolation.
Yeah.
And so, back in the day, it was like, oh, it work on my machine, it doesn't work on production.
Right.
So Docker really solved that. And also super fast because back in the day, virtual machine was definitely a thing, right? But they never take off because it's so slow and so expensive.
Right.
And it's actually really a recent thing is because Linux recently kernel is about supporting a namespacing.
Right.
Namespacing is essentially the foundational key of both Kubernetes and Docker to run.
Yeah.
So both of these key technology allow the fundamental namespacing in Linux allow all these decoupling ideal grow like crazy.
Right. Yep, you're right.
Sorry.
No problem. Thanks for that contribution.
The namespacing and decoupling, all of that goes to the secure communication, right?
Yeah. So like I was saying, all these technologies came together at the time that they were really needed. Okay. Otherwise, like people say, containers have been around for some time, but Docker came with a technology that makes them sexy, which is pretty much the fact that your container can now be created in an image, and that image can be taken anywhere and be used over there. So that makes them really, really versatile. But anyway, all the issues of namespaces and Anon and Linux kernel, that gave us Docker. So from Docker, we have to move much further, and that is where Kubernetes came. So Kubernetes came as an orchestrator to help us solve all these microservices challenges, which I mentioned earlier. And so that is where they come together. We have microservices on one hand, which is being driven by the fact that people are moving to the cloud. And then we have the Kubernetes or the platform that best or suit this migration methodologies perfect. Okay, so the two of them works quite well. All right, so haven't made those introduction, then what I wanted to do is to show you a demo of how we can take an application that we just have, like any application, make it, Dockerize it first, then run it in Kubernetes. Okay, so now that we talk about microservices, they can be APIs, they can be, it just depends on how you deploy them. Okay, so when we talk about Docker, Docker is known for three main things. And who can remind us of those three main things? Three main things that Docker does.
Containerized.
Mm-hmm.
Virtualize.
Yeah. Well, with Docker, we can build, we can ship, and we can run. Those are the three things. We build our images or we build our application. In that build, we package all the dependencies that are needed. If it's a Python Flask, like you mentioned, you put all the dependencies or the binaries that Python is going to need to run that application. We package all that in an image. Then where do we send that image to? Where do we send it to? Where do we push it to?
Registry.
Yeah, push it to a registry. And what is the most common registry that we have?
Docker Hub.
Docker Hub, yeah. Very good. So you have your application, you package it into an image. This is what we call the build. Then you ship it. The shipping is what we mean by pushing it to a repository. And we have image repositories. Now we have so many image repositories that you can use. Even on AWS, you have ECR. Almost every cloud platform now have their own container registry that you can push your images to. So once you push your image to a container registry, then you can run the application. And if you run your application on a single container, the problem with that is that it doesn't handle all the other problems of communication, of security, of scheduling, and everything that I was talking about. So while Docker is very good on a single image or a single container, it doesn't solve the entire problem. And that is where Kubernetes comes in. So Kubernetes actually come to solve the problem of run, okay? We have build, ship, and run. Kubernetes comes to help with the run. It doesn't do anything about the building, it doesn't do anything about the shipping. Those still exist. Those will continue to exist so long as this architecture remains. So often, you still have to learn some things about Docker and about Docker to be able to package your images and be able to ship them to some registry. And then Kubernetes can now come in. So what I'm going to do here in my demo, like I said, is that I'm going to go through a simple application, which is just a simple API. Sorry. All right, so I'm here on my environment. I can actually show you, I have a cluster here deployed on AWS. I pretty much have 3 nodes. I have a master node, and I have 2 worker nodes. Like I said, I'm not going to go into architectures of Kubernetes and all that because I already have some videos on that. And if it's not something you're familiar with, maybe you can go ahead and refresh on that. But now I have a master node and 2 worker nodes. So the one I just logged on to, hopefully, is this one here, which is 393, and the private IP address is ends in 49. So hopefully that should be this one here that ends in 49. So now if I say kubectl get nodes, I have my nodes, which I just showed you. I have my master, and I have my 2 worker nodes, and all of them are here ready. So on one hand is my Kubernetes cluster. On the other hand is a microservice that I actually want to show you, which is this Flask book API. And these applications I'm using, I actually don't develop them. Most of them are available free online. So this one here is this API here written in Python Flask. If you talk about microservices using Python, Flask is like the most common API that people will use for developing that, or the framework that people will use for developing that. So this is just a very simple API with 2 books, all of them hard-coded. So ordinarily, they should be going to a database, but we just hard-code them in here for demo purposes. And so basically, there's a Python microservice, okay? And all the APIs calls are there, like get, put, on and on is there. But anyway, the focus of this is not so much on the code itself. The focus of this is on how to run this. Okay, so now, Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I see you have the master and the slave nodes there.
Mhm.
Those, this is the virtual machine that you're.
Yeah, these are 3 virtual machines, 3 EC2 instances on
You're not
AWS.
using the AWS Kubernetes.
I'm not using the EKS. So I have the option to use my own managed Kubernetes cluster or to use a managed Kubernetes cluster. EKS is managed by AWS. This I'm managing myself. Okay. All right, so now I got my Docker file. I can say cut or I can open it, whichever one is going to show it better, which is basically the steps you use to package your application into an image. So you first have to create a Docker file. And you have here, first line here from, which means you're selecting the base image I'm going to use for this, my microservice. And then after that, I do install my application, like I install pip, pipe env. Then I create my project directory. And basically, I do some copying, just things I know are needed for my application. And if you were running your own application, you will also decide on the things you think are important. Maybe you need to copy some files from one location to another location. You need to expose certain directories, on and on. So after that, I'm going to expose this application there on that node, on that port, which is basically 5,000. And so to run this image, I just have to run this image to create my image. So to make things easier and faster, I have all that documented here. So this application here is on my Git repository. You can clone it. And so, or I already cloned it. When I clone it, it's called a REST API microservice Docker. And that is where I am now, REST API microservice Docker. If you want, just do git clone. And that will take care of that. Then change directory there, which is where we are. And now I can now build my image. So all this will be fast. So I'm going to give my image a new version, and I can say 11. So I'm giving my image a new version, and that is the command there, docker build, and I'm going to tag it with that label, and then I'm going to let it run. And hopefully, everything will be successful. Otherwise, just understand that it's a demo. And demo don't work. So that will basically prepare the image, and then it will push it. While that is happening, I can show you my Git repository if I still have it here. I think I have it on this one here. And because I'm sharing my screen, I have so many things open. Okay. All right. So this has been successfully created, built, and tagged. So now if I do Docker images, I should have my image, which I just built. And that is the last one there, version 1.11. And that was created 17 seconds ago. So we know that is the image we just built. All right. So after that, let's see what next we need to do. I'm going to run it. I'm going to run it without having to push it to the registry. I'm running it locally. Okay. So I'm going to do Docker run, and I need to tell it the version of the image I'm using, and that will be version 1.11. And so I'm going to expose the port. It was exposed on 5,000. I'm going to also expose it on 5,000 on my laptop. All right, so let's see what it's saying here. All right, yeah. Let me remove that. Docker. Okay, remove, or I can give it a new name. Let me give it a new name 1. Okay, so I just give it a new name, and now my application is actually running, it's exposed on that port. For me to make some API queries to this port, I need to log on, create another shell, and log on to my server. So let me see if I have that IP here.
So, sorry for the interrupt.
No, go on.
That's a good example you just did now. So I can have multiple instances to deploy. If I'm doing something in production and if I want to make some changes, I can try it out, just like what you did just now. you had a different name,
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So it
I can
doesn't
give-
affect the other existing.
Yeah. The
applications.
thing with Docker is you can't have the two containers with the same name. So you need to change the name of the container.
Why you even assigning it? It will automatically assign it for you. So what was the point?
Sorry, what?
It's not a required parameter. Why you providing it?
Yeah, you don't have to put a name, but I want to be able to make a call to that API. So yes, you are right. The Docker will give you an image to give an ID, and that ID has to be unique.
Yeah, I hate that.
Yeah, but-
once you PS later, you have all these things.
Yep, and-
Well, and you wouldn't run into this issue if you just had it.
Yep, yep. There definitely several ways to skin the cat. So now we have that running there, and now we can just make a call to that IP, and that will give us the what we have. So basically, who can tell me what we have here? We made a call to that IP, and we have the two books that I showed you in that file. So that's book 1 and that's book 2. And like any API, I can make a call to one of them, and that is the first book, and that is the second book. And if I go to the third, it's going to yell at me and say, I don't have any book. So now we know how to run our application using Docker. We don't need Kubernetes in this case. We just need Docker to run it. But now if I want to use Kubernetes, it makes sense that I upload this image to my repository or my Docker Hub account, and then after that, I can run it from there. So that's the next stage I'm going to do. Already, we packaged the image, which is the build. Now I'm going to push it, which is the run, which is the ship. So let's do that. I'm just going to push it. So first of all, I need to log in to this environment, to Docker environment, Docker login, and put my username, and hopefully I remember my password. Otherwise, okay, so it's saying got permission denied, trying to connect. Okay, so Docker login. That is my login. Why is not taking? Okay, let me try another one.
Oh, yeah, you're right now, SSH to,
Don't you need to run it as a root?
yeah, you want to do it locally.
Oh yeah, you're right. No. I did it on this server, right? I'm pushing it from this server. This is the server I did that. Oh,
Your image is built locally.
No, I built it on this. I built it on AWS. I didn't build it on my local machine. I built it on AWS. But yes, am I right? Let me do sudo su. Let me do Docker login. Oops. Docker login. And okay, yeah. So my details, it was just a matter of root. Thanks for that. So 2 heads are always better than 1. All right. So now I've been able to log on. So now I just need to push my image, and that would be Docker push. And I'm going to give it a level that I can use. So that was 11. And I wanted to show you my Docker account. Anyone here who doesn't use Docker Hub? Well, that is my account right here. Let me refresh. Okay, so this was 4 hours ago. So let's push. The one I'm going to push is going to be 1.11. So when we push it, we're going to see it appear over there. Okay, I haven't tagged it. Tag does not exist. So okay. Now I'm getting too fast. I need to slow down now. So let me tag it first. Docker tag. All right. I need to tag this one here too. I'm basically saying, give it this name and then push it. All right. So let's hope that it's done it. No, we have to push it. Now I just tag it. Now I can push it. All right. Now it's pushing it to my account. So now it's done. 1.11. So if I come here and I refresh, I should see my new image available. Okay, well, it's trying to load or what? Okay, let me go back. All right, it's come down eventually. Okay, so that's 1.11 that I just pushed, and rightly said a few seconds ago. So now I push my image to Docker Hub. I've shipped it, and now anybody can use it, including any of you here, because it's public, you can use it. All right, so now that I have my image, how do I run it in Kubernetes? Who have an idea of how to run it in Kubernetes?
Oh, yeah. That's lots of work. You need create a deployment,
Yeah.
and you need to define a YAML file,
Mhm.
and which set your essentially your YAML file is going to tell right there. It tells Kubernetes how many replica it needs. You
Okay.
know, what they need to check before you go in, like how it handle it, like.
All right, cool, thanks.
Image.
Yeah, thank you. So Kubernetes has all these multiple objects. They are called Kubernetes objects. And the basic unit or basic object is pod. A pod is just like a container in Docker, but kind of decorated to be more fancy. You can have like 2 containers in a pod. You can, let them have the same volume, same networking, all sorts of things. It's kind of decorated in a nicer way, and that is what Google thought was the best thing to do. Because I remember in the early days of Docker and Kubernetes, Docker Swarm and Kubernetes, all the arguments that went between Docker community and Google community, there were all sorts of argument and debate in those early days. And Google said, this is how we've always done it, and it worked for us, so we're going to stick to it. So basically, it works very well, and a pod is basically the fundamental unit of deployment in Kubernetes. However, in production applications, in production microservices, you want something a little bit higher than a pod. So in between the pod and the deployment object that he talks about is a replica set in between them. But usually, we just use deployment object. So to create your application in Kubernetes, you have to create a deployment object. To do that, you need the most easiest way is to use a YAML file, but you can also do it just from the CLI. So I already have the file here and the deployment file here. Let me go into Flask. Okay, and then let me go into that. And I have this file here called deploy. And basically, this is the deployment file for the YAML. And you have all the, all the usuals. You have to tell the API version, the kind, you specify if it's a pod or a deployment or a service or whatever. You specify all that in there, give some metadata information with some labels. And now the interesting things start. So here we're saying we would like to run 3 replicas of this application as default. I can scale it to any number I want, but as default, 3 replicas. And those replicas are going to be selected based on the labels that I give to my pods. Then eventually, I'm just saying, use this image. So which means I need to change this image to 11 because that was the one that I just uploaded. So this is the connection between my Kubernetes and Docker. I need to tell it the image to use. And I need to tell it basically the account that has that image. All right. So I'm going to stop at that. Once I have that ready, then I come back to my friend kubectl, kubectl. Then I say create -f, and I give it that file. And then I do that. Now it said deployment created. Now I can say kubectl get pod. Eventually, our deployment object is going to end up creating pods. Whatever you do, you are going to be working with pods. It's just that the deployment object is a better way to manage this pod. All right. So when I do that, I check my pods, and all of them are good. The 3 replicas I wanted, they're all there running. So at the moment, each one of these is an individual microservice. It's an individual independent application. If I want to address them as a single application, what do I need to do?
Service.
Now, thanks. Now I need to create a service to expose all these replicas, like my load balancer coming into my applications, and then I have all these multiple replicas. And then I can scale as many as I want, and my customers can still come in through the load balancer or the service object. There are, few different types of service objects. You have the cluster IP, you have the node port, you have the load balancer. But by default, the cluster IP is what you get. If you want something more, you need to specify it. Cluster IP is just only good for local server. If you want something from outside, then you can use node port. But load balancer is actually the recommended way. Node port can have a lot of issues because you're allowing people directly accessing your server or your Kubernetes node in this case. So, but to have the load balancer, you need to have the necessary infrastructure in place. All right. If you're on AWS, you need to ensure that you actually allow your cluster to be able to talk to AWS and request a load balancer. And that means it depends on the deployment tool that you use. If you use something like Kops, which is a deployment tool for that automatically integrate your cluster with the cloud platform, then you can request a load balancer from your cloud provider. But if you use something like Kubernetes, that is not possible. Another alternative, of course, is to use a managed cluster like you was asking earlier. I can use EKS, then I don't have to worry about all this deployment headache that I need to get.
I recently experienced this issue myself too.
Right.
I just realized I've been using cloud Kubernetes for the longest time, so I didn't realize Kubernetes need an external load balancer.
Right.
And so in the cloud, all you need is like, hey, give me an external load balancer. They will give you an IP address from nowhere. You never have to worry about it.
Right.
But if you have a KA instance locally, and then you try to create a load balancer type service,
it's gonna fail.
Like, where am I getting this IP address from?
Yeah.
And more documentation.
Yeah, cool. So basically now I got 3 microservices running, all of them independent, all of them autonomous. So the queries you saw me running earlier to get those IP, to get those books, like the ones I run here, I can equally run them on those individual pods, and I can get my requests as well. But to do that, I can say -o wide to get the IP addresses of those pods. So now I can paste that command there, and I can just replace this IP here with the IP of the pod. Of the pods, like let's use the first one, 10.47.0.1, and request that, and I get my request. And I can also get the first one, and I get the second one, and no possible. So I can do that on any of these because they are all independent. So if I want to expose them, like we just discussed, I just need to expose them through a service. And I actually have a service running. I suspect it's going to capture all these ones because they have the same levels. So if I say kubectl get endpoint, you see my service now has a bunch of endpoints, which are basically those IP addresses that I have here: 124, 4, 1, 2. All right, so now this service is already available, but if you want, I can delete it and create it again. Basically, this is the file, vim service.yaml. I have 2 services here. This one is going to be for the cluster IP because I didn't specify what type of service I want. All right, but if I want something else, I have this one here, which is basically the node port, and I have to tell it type node port. If I don't specify the type, it goes and choose for me a cluster IP. The good thing with this one here is who knows how to access a node port? I say kubectl get SVC, which, well, I can, if I want to use a local IP, I can come here and replace this IP now. I can replace this IP with my 10.96.154.206, which is basically this service IP. So this will be pointing to all the ports. Okay, so 206, 5,000. That'll be on 5,000, and I can see get that. So Coral, HTTP.
Number 3.
Oh yeah, thank you. Okay, let's remove that. Put 1. Okay, now I get that coming from here as well. However, this is using the cluster IP, so I'm using the first port. For node port, that means I can come in from outside. And since I'm running this on AWS, it essentially means that I can come in through any of the IP addresses of these my nodes. So if I pick one of this node here, this is the public IP. My node 1 is the public IP. If I pick that one and I create a tab and I paste it there and I put the port I'm going to put in this case is not going to be the local port. It will be the node port, which is basically 31,000. So if I put that one here and I put /books, I should see my API's call. And if I put a /1, that should become book 1. Again, if I put /2, that should become book 2. So now you see that I've been able to expose my service on a node port. But like I said, this is not the ideal. You want to expose on a load balancer. But to expose on a load balancer with this cluster that I deploy with kubeadm, I don't have any chance.
IP address that you have there,
Mm-hmm.
is that the public IP address of the node?
Yeah, that's the public IP address of the node.
So you can still say a local port too, right? Then 5,000 should work as well.
No, that wouldn't work here. That will only work on a local server. That I can use here.
Oh, okay, did not.
Yeah. And the good thing with the cluster IP, or with node port rather, is that I can use any of this. So I can essentially come here and copy this one here. And if I go back to here and I replace the IP with this one here, that should work as well.
Is there any production reason to use a node port?
Well, I mostly use node port for testing purposes.
Yeah.
Especially if it's not ready for production yet, then I use node port. But once it's ready for production, then you want to use something like load balancer. All right, so pretty much we have been able to take a microservice, a single one, and went through all the process that you need to make it available for Kubernetes deployment or for Kubernetes to manage it. This is just one. Now, if you have a lot, you have to repeat this for all the steps. But of course, the person who developed those microservices need to understand how they need to communicate, and whenever they need to get information from each other, all that need to be taken care of by the developers. And I have another one here, again, publicly available, which is kind of more interesting than a simple one. So if we go to Microservices demo, this has something called sock shop. So if I say kubectl get namespace, I have my namespace here, and this one is all running there. So if I say kubectl get namespace -n sock shop, I got all the kubectl get pods in this case. Get pods. -n sock shop, I have, oops. Okay, now let me go grab -r running. Let me just say grab running. Running with R, capital R. Okay, so I have all these microservices here, different components, cart. This is an e-commerce application. He has cart, he has catalog, he has front end, he has orders, payments, queue, RabbitMQ, on and on. So if I want to show you this, I also need to go check the service and see what service where it's exposed on. So I can say kubectl get svc -n, and I'm going to look for the front end because that's what it says. Front end should be the one to communicate for communication with the users. So here again, I can access this locally on port 80, but if I want to do that on the from the cluster, I can copy that IP and I can just come here and just replace that port with this one here and wait. And that's the microservice. So this is a full e-commerce application, and you can log in here and you can register, and then you can continue to buy stuff. And I'll show you some cool stocks here if you want to buy these stocks. So basically, this is an application called Sock Shop by Weavsworks. Weavsocks. Basically, this is changed now to Weavsocks. All right, so we can see how this concept can be used to build modern e-commerce applications. And most applications we see these days, including Uber, Airbnb, Netflix, these are all microservices-based applications. All of them deployed running Docker and Kubernetes because that is a platform that is doing the job. And no one has any complaint, except that it's too complex. And except that the learning curve can be quite steep, but once you get involved with it, just get cracking. So there are a lot of concepts here. You talk about microservices, which developers have to learn to develop using whichever library they're using, Python, Java, the most common ones, or even JavaScript. JavaScript is quite popular as well. So all that challenges have to be dealt with. Then you need to deal with the platform itself. And so when it comes to Kubernetes, on top of that, once you have the basic application running, then you want to see how you can actually put all these other layers like ETO to help you manage all the encryption between the communication between the microservices and all the other security-related issues that you want to handle. So we see that the platform, the ecosystem is quite big. And our meetup, basically, we intend talking about all those things that they discuss. So if you go to cncf.io, that is a body handling all these complications of Kubernetes and microservices and all the things in the ecosystem. And I like the landscape, which you probably have seen before, the Kubernetes landscape, which shows you all the multiple projects that people are working on. So let's see if we can find it here. Otherwise, we're going to projects. Okay. Okay, then. Yeah, thank you, Cloud Native Landscape. And we see all this bunch of tools. And you can see which of them you want to use to help you, and they are categorized based on different categories. You have the database, you have the streaming and messaging, application definition and image build. We just did some image build. Yeah, these are all open source. And we have the continuous integration. Because another thing with microservices is that it fits very well with the DevOps team. You can have a team responsible for just one microservice, and all they have to do is manage it, own it, and then people like a team can help them do all the agile management stuff on that microservice. So we have the container registry here. Like I said, we have to use Docker Hub is the most common one. Have security and compliance, key management, automation. So this is a very large and wide area, but you can always start from somewhere. Once you understand the basics, you can always build on top of those. All right, so pretty much I think that's all I wanted to show you guys. And with the time we just spent, I think that will end nicely here. I can leave the floor for any question if you have any question. Or if you have any addition, you can do that as well.
So, what if you, do you, so would you, if you set up a local instance of Kubernetes, which one you would use?
Local instance?
Yeah.
I normally just use Kubernetes because it's one of those early ones that really work. So all our trainings back in the days, we always use Kubernetes, and we kind of got stuck with it. If I want to do a deployment cluster, I use kops. I already have all the infrastructure set up on AWS, and I can just go there and create a cluster and use it. Yeah, but these days there are a lot of tools, a lot of Kubernetes deployment tools. We probably will see it here, and if you click on it, you see all the options. You see there are a lot of platform there. So logging, chaos, continuous organization, training partners. Okay, yeah, so if you look very well, you'll find, okay, you'll find them here. Let's see, platform, hosted Kubernetes, certified Kubernetes installer. Yeah, under the installer, you can see, Rancher, Puppet, Talos, Weave. This is the one we're using, like I said.
Oh, okay.
This is the one I use mostly for production.
Oh, okay. Oh,
So you have all these tools here.
I don't see Kind in there, which is surprising.
Which one?
Kind.
Oh, Kind. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Kind might be.
I'm sure they are. That's weird.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
Yeah, I don't see Kind. Yeah, you're right, but Kind can be quite handy.
Yeah, it's probably one of the fastest one I see. That I personally use Kind.
Right.
But okay, so that's the rancher that earlier he was talking about.
Right.
Too many. This is like so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. You think the one more business eventually will migrate to like AWS, like EKS, like public providers, Kubernetes solution versus on-premise, like RKE. Right now, the company I'm working for, we have on-premise, and also we plan to do some EKS. But with one more companies doing away with private cloud, do you think eventually everybody will just be doing EKS, AKS, and what's GKE?
Well, I think the world will remain always mixed because people have so many different use cases. There will always be on-premises, there will always be private cloud, there will always be public cloud, there will always be multi-cloud. At least that's what people come to realize. Because I was in the OpenStack community, and in the OpenStack community, people were thinking that they were not going to AWS. A lot of people thought we're not going to AWS, so we need to manage our own data center. And so OpenStack became very appealing. Then they saw how hard it was, the challenges of deploying OpenStack and making it really, really ready for production and having an effective team. They discovered that was actually really hard. Eventually, they had to admit. And then Docker and Kubernetes came, and that said, everyone said, all right, now we understand. We're not doing OpenStack anymore. Now then AWS was now, well, the public cloud was now everybody's option. Like, we don't need to spend all this money doing all this if we can just easily create all this in the public cloud with all this Docker and Kubernetes thingy. So that made a major shift.
True.
But now people are realizing, wow, there are still some workload that we need to have on premises. So I think pretty much now the market is kind of settled. Everybody's going to do what they need to do to solve their own problem.
True though, I feel that I recently go through some interview,
Mhm.
And I see that trend is that these days, even big corporation doesn't really want to manage Kubernetes themselves.
Mhm.
They would prefer cloud function, so that they don't even need to hire network admin for it.
Right.
Cloud function,
Mhm.
it's that function.
Right. Like serverless.
So, yeah, like totally
Mhm.
managed service. They just want to hire developer.
Yeah.
And implement the business logic.
Yeah.
They don't want to. So my personal feel is that like Kubernetes is like super powerful.
Mhm.
But the problem is like all these certificate ingress setting
Mhm.
and help. I feel like the learning hurdle, learning
Curve.
so steep that
Yeah.
like most company doesn't want to hire, doesn't want to invest tons of resource to train a network admin.
Yeah.
Then they go somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, I think generally it just depends on the company you're talking about. It depends on their business model and what they are trying to achieve. If a company doesn't think it's worth spending this money on some admins and training them, they just go use a managed service. But if you're a technology company offering this solution to people, you don't have any option. You have to make it work.
I think it's good to polarize.
Mm.
The complexity, my suspicion is that these like super complex, that's going to be like only like Google, Amazon.
Mhm.
They hire these like super fancy people
Mhm.
to like really optimize
Mhm.
their infrastructure code.
Mhm.
But then most of the small business,
Mhm.
that they don't have a critical infrastructure requirement. They will just use like cloud function and like step function and pub sub.
Right. Yep.
I feel like that's the trend. Like a lot of companies these days, they just like they don't even want to having their own Kafka instance
Mhm.
running. They just want like, hey, give me an API and I just call it.
Yep.
Well, I think it's more than anything else, not the companies, it's what the consumers are, right? Now, in those days, your phone was down for 5 minutes, you call the company and they say, I'm not gonna pay this month. No, dues. Today, an application is not working, you try again, so the kind of service that people are expecting is also changing. Right? You don't expect that 99.99% quality, right? And here companies say, okay, I have 1 million customers, 3 of them are going to complain. What do? I just go take care of them, I pay them or compensate them. I go on with life, right? I don't want to be just for taking care of 3 customers. I don't want to have 100 people working in my company. So I think it's a lot more to do with the consumer behavior